Greetings. I am going to get us started with tonight's program. My name is Adam Lehman. I am privileged to serve as the president and CEO of Hillel International, which for tonight's purposes means I get to introduce an awesome featured guest, an awesome program. We are joined tonight by Marcella Kanfer Rolnick, and I'll share more about Marcella, but we're really pleased to be able to host a conversation with Marcella as a business leader, as a philanthropist, as a woman who has really demonstrated just so much admirable in both of those domains from which I think we can all learn. Before we get into the program, I want to thank the participating and co-sponsoring Hillels, Cleveland Hillel, the Center for Jewish Life at Princeton, and Hillel at Stanford. I also want to give a special shout out to the Hillel at Kent State and University of Akron, where Marcella has personally been involved over time supporting the Hillel and the strategy of the Hillel, and where the Lippman Kaufman Family Foundation has also played a critical role. With all of our Hillel at Home events, we really appreciate partnering with campus Hillels around the Hillel movement to bring unique voices and unique conversations to the Jewish world and beyond. I do want to emphasize for the group that's gathered, like so many of our Hillel at Home events, we'll have a good and hopefully active conversation with the group that's here live. One thing we learned early on, Hillel at Home was born out of the pandemic. One thing we learned early on is that, particularly for students, they are time shifters. And we expect that this program, like so many of our programs, will be drawn upon by lots of folks after the fact. So keep the questions snappy and compelling, because there are lots of other folks over time who are likely to benefit from the conversation. In terms of the program itself, it is part of our Leadership in Business series. I'm going to introduce Marcella, introduce our two student facilitators, and then we'll get into it. Marcella Kanfer Rolnick focuses on creating meaning and value every day through her diverse family enterprise, which includes GOJO, maker of Purell brand solutions, which are, of course, the #1 hand sanitizers and associate other products. She is the executive chair of GOJO and has also founded and guides Walnut Ridge, a family office that supports the business, investment, philanthropic, and multi-generational family goals of the Kanfer family. In terms of philanthropy, Marcella is a director of the Lippman Kaufman Family Foundation and has also serves on and has served on a wide variety of other Jewish organizations. I'll ask Paula Harlan, who's on the call with us tonight, to put in the chat Marcella's full bio, so you can see some of the other organizations that Marcella has personally been involved with and played a leadership role within. I will just say that I've had the chance to get to know Marcella over the past many years when I've been serving in my capacity at Hillel, and I've just always found her to be so thoughtful, someone I can consult on big picture issues, but it's someone who really gets our work, our world, and has that unique perspective of having been a successful leader and innovator, both in the business domain, but also in the philanthropic domain. And so I feel privileged to know Marcella and that she's going to be sharing some of her wisdom and just perspective with us tonight. In terms of helping to draw out that perspective, we've got two terrific student facilitators. Celia Buckband, who is a senior at Princeton University, majoring in the School of Public and International Affairs and minoring in Spanish. She serves as the education chair of the CJL, the Center for Jewish Life, at Princeton. And she's been involved in Jewish life in a variety of other capacities through our Jewish Learning Fellowships, Campus Engagement Intern Program, and Kesher, the Reform Student Group. As if that's not keeping her busy enough, she's also the head copy editor for the Daily Princetonian and the former president of the Princeton College Democrats. Celia is joined by Eli Kaufman. Eli recently graduated magna cum laude from Miami University's Farmer School of Business, where he majored in marketing. Among the many internships and professional experiences that Eli was able to participate in, he actually had a marketing internship at GOJO Industries back in 2019 as part of the Cleveland Hillel summer internship program. And it was nice to hear Marcella and Eli bantering ahead of time on what an effective summer intern Eli was. No surprise then that he's gone on to strong career step as part of Kerry's 3-year marketing rotation program. He's based in Madison, Wisconsin, and Kerry is the world's leading taste and nutrition company. So that gives you a sense of our facilitators and of Marcella, and I'm going to turn it over to Celia and Eli to carry forward from here. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for that, for the introduction, and I'm very honored to be here helping facilitate. So I think I'm going to get us kicked off with the first few questions here, and then me and Celia are going to take our turns asking some questions. So I guess we can dive right into it. So the first question that we have is, the pandemic has disrupted life for everyone, but you've been in a uniquely challenging role as the executive chair of GOJO, the global leader in skin, health, and hygiene solutions through Purell products. What was it like to lead GOJO at a time that Purell products were in such extreme demand?
Thanks, Eli, and thanks, Adam and Celia and the whole team behind this program. It is so fun to be with you all tonight. I'm having flashbacks seeing some of the names of people that I actually went to college with who have joined us. So it's nice to see some alums joining us as well, and just to feel so supported by my college community and my native Ohio community. So thanks for having me, and I really look forward to the conversation tonight. So who knew that we were going to wake up in early 2020? This is actually before most of us in this country were aware of what was really going to happen, and the world was going to turn out like it did. Fortunately, we have something called a detect and alert process that allows us to scan the world and talk to some of the leading epidemiologists and prognosticators around outbreaks, because we have gone through something similar, never at this scale and this magnitude across the world, but H1N1 was back in 2009, which was a global pandemic. And then there've been other kinds of outbreaks, off and on. So we knew that we had to stay abreast of those kinds of things, but we clearly did not understand the magnitude of what we've all been going through. And I have to say, the first thing that comes to mind is that we are a purpose-driven company. Every single one of our 2,500 or so employees, our team members, wake up in the morning, go to work, and know that they are saving lives and making life better through the solutions that we make and put out into the world. So I think if we had not had that, if we were just motivated by pushing product or making money, we would not have been able to get through the experience, because it was quite grueling. So we were able to wake up in the morning, and even though of course we weren't the full solution, right, but we were a part of the solution. And I have to say, when I was stuck at home or on site with my team, feeling like I had some agency or some ability to create positive impact was really motivating. And at a time when a lot of my friends and family who were tremendous professionals in their own right, their careers didn't lend them that platform for doing something, to have agency. So I have to say, having that purpose and knowing that we got up in the morning to help was life-changing, quite frankly. And in the end of 2019, my father and I had just updated the language of our values. Our values have been around since our family enterprise was founded in 1946, but we were modernizing the language. And little did I know how prescient that was going to be, to have freshly minted values and guiding principles, basically statements of belief and the ways that we act as a community of colleagues to support those beliefs. But we had published them. I was sharing them broadly with our colleagues, and I actually saw them in action every single day as people had to make really difficult decisions. So I'll give you one example. Even though we were producing at 3 times our normal volume, which is tremendous, ask any business to triple their output overnight. It's virtually impossible, but we had expanded our capacity because of prior experiences. Little do we know that what we had expanded wouldn't be enough for a future surge. But even with the 3 times production, running flat out 24/7, also working with outside producers, not just our own team members, our own facilities, we just couldn't keep up. I mean, basically, I like to think of it as infinite demand. Now, turns out that infinite demand does not actually equal infinite consumption, which is a whole other topic which we may get to. But the demand was infinite. So one of the things that our values led us to do was actually prioritize markets. So that means some of you may have been able to go out and buy Purell for yourself as a consumer early in the pandemic, but shortly after that, noticed that there was no Purell to be found. And that was because we actually had to deprioritize the consumer shelf and prioritize healthcare, frontline workers, government who were serving in capacities to help people navigate the pandemic and so forth. Eventually we were able to support infrastructure like the postal service and food service workers. But for a while, we really just had to do everything we could to save lives, right? And that was what we were doing by supporting our business and healthcare. So that was really tough. And believe me, our sales folks have, and many of us have a lot of scars and bruises, taking the wrath on of people who said, but aren't we important? You've been serving us so well for so long. And we said, of course you're important, but we're in a moment of life or death, and this is how we have to do it. And then the last just couple things that I'll just mention about how we got through this is we also had to really think hard about how to take care of our own team members. I like to call our team members the front line behind the front line. So they were, there are so many unsung heroes of this pandemic. But I would say the people who are on the factory floor working to get product made and out the door were really some of those unsung heroes. And I literally, when I would do site visits to some of our factories, walk around and kind of measure the distance and, did we put the right kind of shields between them, and were they wearing their masks the right way? Because my number one priority is that our team members didn't get sick on the job, but were able to stay healthy and keep their families healthy while they were rising to this enormous challenge. So we did a lot to try to keep our team members healthy. And then the last thing I'll say, which I think this is sort of interesting, is that it was kind of wild to watch the social media evolution of how people talked about Purell, the brand, and our products. And we actually had a team of marketers and social scientists that got together and did some analysis. And these are probably not their exact words, but they came up with stages. And in my words, I would say the first stage was it was almost kind of playful and like an accessory, like people taking selfies of like, look at me, I got my Purell, and kind of playful. And that was before anyone realized how serious things were getting. And then it became much more of a, thank God I have my Purell, a little bit more urgency, a little more edge to it, but it was still kind of like, I'm proud, I'm protecting myself, I'm being smart. That was sort of the next stage. And then unfortunately it got kind of ugly where it was more like talking about the windfall that our company must be experiencing and all kinds of sort of distorted memes out there. And then it started to get sort of angry and frustrated because people couldn't get the Purell for themselves and the people that they loved. It's obviously tapered down. Now everyone who wants Purell can get Purell, thankfully. We've expanded our production by, well, it depends on what bottle format, by in some cases, sort of 30%, in some cases 3%, but overall we advanced 10 years worth of investment in our capital infrastructure. So now anyone who wants Purell can certainly get it. But it was sort of fascinating to sort of track the journey of how our brand meant something to the world. So that was a lot, but it's been a really big, impactful experience to go through this and feel so responsible for both our own team members as well as many people out in the world that we could serve.
Yeah, that's definitely some great insight into kind of behind the scenes of what you guys went through throughout the pandemic. And I think a lot of that is actually going to be a great segue into my second question, which is, according to MBLM's brand intimacy COVID study, Purell ranked as the top brand people are using the most during the second year of the pandemic, followed by Zoom and Netflix. How does it feel to have helped give peace of mind to so many consumers around the world? And then also, how do you see GOJO maintaining that momentum as the world slowly emerges out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was so humbling and incredible. I could not believe, my mind was blown when I found out that our brand ranked even higher than Zoom and Netflix, because I see that, you know, every single person is doing Zoom every day. Well, I mean, in certain fields, right, and education, and then Netflix just seems to be how everyone's using their found time. So it was really, you know, sort of incredible and humbling. And also, I'm so proud, you know, it's a family enterprise. We're a small little company based, relatively speaking, based out of Northeast Ohio. My great aunt and uncle founded it in the 1940s to solve an important human problem. And all of us just get up every day saying, how can we solve important human problems? So to know that the world, with all of its craziness out there, values, you know, a high integrity brand and set of products that are just trying to be helpful and do the right thing is just really, it's sort of validating and gives me a lot of hope for humanity and for society that their values sort of lined up with what we're trying to do in the world. In terms of what this means for the future, because, you know, some people would say, well, Purell is really a crisis response brand, or a product that you use in a hot moment, but every day, who really needs it? I will tell you, we just have a whole bunch of new market research that our team has done. We've been tracking, you know, public sentiment, both just the broad public as well as people in different sectors like food service, hospitality, air travel, healthcare, and so forth. And I'm going to cite a couple of things which might surprise you. I was sort of surprised happily about this, because quite frankly, before I read you some of the hot off the press data, I will tell you that I have been saying for years, we created the brand and the product category of hand sanitizer back in the 80s, you know, when I was still a kid. And, you know, we've been working this for generations now, quite frankly. And, you know, it's really a good everyday behavior. I mean, hand washing, hand hygiene, doing it in a targeted way. You know, during the pandemic, it was vigilant. It was like every time you move, every time you touch something, use Purell. Now that's crazy for every day, right? But targeted moments in the right time, which I talk about, like reducing the bio load of microorganisms that can get you sick, the transient ones that don't reside in your skin in its natural form, but the stuff that you pick up and then touch and transfer or enter into your body through your nose, mouth, and eyes. You know, that just disrupting those vectors, reducing the bio load throughout the day at key times, before you eat, before you prepare food, after you go to the bathroom, after you're in public transit. You only need to do it a couple times a day, and it can really help reduce unnecessary infection. So I feel really good about that starting premise. But I will tell you that it is nerve-wracking to say, wow, is this sort of a one-hit wonder that happens every couple of years whenever there's an outbreak? But this research, which is a broad base of general public research, statistically significant, just said that only 12% of the public perceive hand sanitizer as being only when there's a pandemic. So that means the vast majority of people think that it's relevant in non-pandemic times. I will also tell you that 3 out of 10 people, so 30% of people, would use a sanitizer up to 3 times, maybe 3 or 4 times a week before the pandemic. And now that is trending at, and people are projecting it to be 70% of people. So that is a huge uptick in how many people say that this is something they're going to do 3 or 4 more times a week. Another way of looking at that statistic was that the number of people using sanitizer daily from before the pandemic to now was up 4 times. These are people who use it daily, right? So that's a sort of subsection of people who use it at least 3 or 4 times. And those people project to use it three times as many people are projected to use it every day after the pandemic, which we're not even in yet right now, right? This is just sort of their imaginings. So that is, that's pretty amazing to know that people are sort of getting the message. Hey, it's a simple, low cost, easy, efficient way to just stay healthy. I can do this, right? And I can provide it to my patrons, or provide it to my team members, or provide it to my students and teachers and so forth. So just a couple more stats, which I think are interesting. Maybe it's because that's why I'm in the business, why I think it's so interesting. Hopefully some of you will too, and you're not going to probably have access to this data anywhere else. So I'll share it with you right now. Purell is used 4 times as often out in public spaces than non-branded sanitizer. So how many of you have seen sort of stuff that was just thrown together, some random brand or a random label out in, in the bottle, or even on a wall in a dispenser out at a restaurant or a doctor's office or someplace, right? A lot of you, if not all of you. I see a lot of heads nodding. So it's really validating to know that 4 times as much product is used. So people trust it that much more than the stuff that was just thrown together. And look, the truth is the FDA regulates our product categories, and I can talk about this more later perhaps. But the FDA, in order to make sanitizer as broadly available, since we and a couple of the other, there aren't that many of us who make high integrity products, but all of us could not meet this infinite demand. And so they lowered their standards and allowed more products to come into the market. And this is what happens if people, the products aren't made to the same high quality standards. 250 brands were already recalled out of that. So it's really validating to know that people recognize the difference, right? That there is a difference between a brand that's been around for 30 plus years versus someone who just decided they could convert their whiskey manufacturer into a sanitizer manufacturer. You get better margins on whiskey, so it's better to go back to that anyways.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was actually really interesting statistics. I'm going to broaden it a little bit. So can you tell us about your experience as a woman during your MBA and throughout your business career? What obstacles do you think interfere with many women reaching the highest levels in business? And what would your advice be to young women about developing themselves as leaders?
Okay, well, so yeah, those are great questions. And I certainly am not going to suggest that I can speak on behalf of women on, on a basis that says this is true for everyone. But I'll just speak from my own personal experience. And I'll probably weave together various points to kind of get at the questions, because there's a lot in that question that you asked. So first of all, I would say this concept of knowing thyself and really sort of, and when you're in college or post-college, you're really starting to figure that out in new ways, because when you're younger, everyone is generally mainstream to go through mostly the same kind of curriculum and the same kinds of opportunities. And then when you get to college, sort of the world opens up and you can start to play around with who you really are and what you really are interested in. But so I would say, it's true for everyone, not just for women, but I think especially for women who, may try to sort of cast their sort of anchor outside of themselves and try to sort of be like the normative culture, which today still really is sort of heteronormatively, a male business culture. But I think it's changing all the time, especially right now. There's just rapid change out in the world. But I would say, first of all, sort of know sort of, and you kind of have to pay attention to yourself and kind of walk ahead of yourself or maybe float above yourself and sort of pay attention to where are you in flow? Where can you not help but be yourself, right? And who are you really aspiring to be? Not just what do you want to do? Don't just think technically about, I want to be a lawyer, but think about why and how you want to be and how you want to work on, not just the what. And people get so distracted on what, and they lose track of what is their true leadership mission, assuming everyone wants to find some place in their lives that they want to be sort of a leader. And I always say, for a woman especially, if you lack your own leadership purpose, then, and you don't know sort of what direction you're going in, then why would anyone want to follow you? And so you really have to be authentic to yourself. And I think that also means knowing what you're not good at or what doesn't bring you flow and where your energy doesn't naturally gravitate. There's a guy named Eric Flamholtz out at UCLA who wrote about this concept called the leadership molecule, which is really sort of identifying 2 or 3 people who essentially come together in this atomic bond and become more than any of them can be just alone. It's not the same as a leadership team, right? We're in a company of every function represented. It's really this special combination of the most essential people whose competencies and flow can sort of plug together and do something extraordinary. So I think, and so there's an example, like these are all men for unfortunately in this example, but the sort of the first one that Eric Flamholtz discovered and sort of started analyzing and writing about was the leadership molecule he called H2O. Howard Schultz, Howard Behar, and Orrin Smith from Starbucks. And so I would actually, let's look at one from our Jewish tradition. So I was thinking about this as I was preparing, and I was thinking, okay, we've got Moshe, whose role, so and Howard and Orrin, one was the CEO vision, one was operations, one was sales, and they really sort of together went from Starbucks being a relatively small company into an operational powerhouse. So think about it as like Moshe, Aharon, and Miriam. So Moshe is sort of, his role was sort of God intimacy. And then Aaron, a sort of people and organizational leadership and systems. And then Miriam, I think about sort of sustaining resources and, like her role with water and bringing the singing and establishing culture. And sort of each of them at this formative time in our peoplehood really sort of played essential roles. And Moshe without Aharon, that's we always talk about that one, but what about without Miriam? So I think, celebrating and sort of lifting up us as women to the unique things that we bring, and they don't have to be different from men. It's just sort of, know yourself. And I would say, a lot of times you hear about women don't help women. And in fact, they can be even worse to women, maybe because they feel threatened. Like there's only so many seats at the table for a woman, so I'm not going to let another woman, jockey for mine. But I would say, whenever anyone feels threatened, or maybe it feels like someone else is threatened by them, to sort of say, well, what are my unique atomic strengths and my leadership essence or purpose, and what are theirs? And I mean, if you are truly duplicative or redundant, then maybe one of you should go find something else to do. But the chances are we're all unique human beings, that's not true. And so, I think in business school, I was just who I was, and there are a lot of other people with very different backgrounds. And I could easily have felt threatened. And instead I decided to feel excited and say, how can I learn from these folks? One of my good friends ended up starting the African Leadership Academy in Africa. And first of all, he was from Africa. Second of all, he had a vision of trying to create a new leadership culture across the continent. I mean, that is just mind blowing. I would have never thought about that or had deep discussions with someone had I not looked at him and said, I'm not going to be threatened by his brilliance. He was the kind of guy who literally would sleep through class. The professor would cold call him and he would answer the question brilliantly and go back to sleep. But instead of feeling threatened by that, I just said, I'm going to get to know him. And so, I mean, I guess I'm not saying anything that's really unique to women. But the last thing I'll say is I do think the reason that women don't get to higher positions is in many ways, aside from maybe some sectors where it's really just a man's world and it's brutal. But in many cases, I think women are actually opting out because, and I talk to my friends who are in consulting and banking all the time, and in many cases, grueling law firms, because, we have historically, maybe it's because of the gatherer in us, have had multiple roles. We've really prioritized. I speak for myself. I have 4 kids. I highly prioritize the role, which is not an easy one. It's actually much harder raising my 4 children than it is running GOJO, even with a pandemic. And so I just think prioritizing doing the right thing, especially the older they get, bigger kids, bigger problems. I think a lot of women just say, I can't do both those jobs as well as I would like to. And so instead of being on the road at clients 4 days a week and just being home for dinner on Friday night, I'm not going to do it. And so I think there's going to have to be a structural change. And I do believe that the younger generations, with expectations of different lifestyle flexibility and having a more robust, diverse life of experiences, not just career orientation, I think it's going to create opportunities for women to start to create the structural design for businesses to operate differently. And other countries in Europe especially do a much better job than we do. And that said, I think that the basic rules of our economic systems, do sort of put a lot of pressure on the way work gets done. But yeah, I'm not sure I answered anything of the other question. I'm just sort of riffing on my varied thoughts. Hopefully it was helpful though.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is actually a great segue into the next question, which is, what was your experience with Jewish life in college and grad school, and how has that meaningfully affected how you think you're Jewish, or how you think about your Jewish identity as an adult?
So, I don't think I was shaped in a new direction in college or grad school, but I think I sort of started to see myself in practice as an independent actor away from my own family of origin. So when I got onto Princeton's campus, I was so excited to find people just like me. I had gone to public school in Ohio, and I still have tremendous friends from my high school, but I felt like I was looking for people who looked a little bit more like me in terms of just all the things I was interested in. And the Jewish piece was really central. And it wasn't immediately obvious where I was going to find that. There was no CJL when I got to campus. There was a kosher, eating house like way down the road from all the eating clubs. So it was really hard to get to and inconvenient. I would really only schlep there for Friday night dinners. But there were a group of women who are a couple years older than I that were looking for next gen women, right? So incoming first and second years, to take over something they had called the Jewish Women's Coalition. And they were sort of a little bit more of advocates and sort of politically sort of motivated than I think my friend and I think we were, honestly, I'm not saying this is a good thing at all, but at the time in the mid 90s or the early 90s, we were a little bit more focused on just creating connections. We were early there. We didn't really know what was going on and what advocacy we should be doing. So rather than take on women's issues, we decided to take on women's connections. And, I think probably this is true for other colleges, but I felt like at Princeton it took a little while to sort of find my people. And so my friend and I decided that we would change it to Jewish Women's Connection. And the Hillel kind of sponsored us without sort of being heavy-handed. They allowed us to be entrepreneurial. And it just was the beginning of sort of saying, yes, being a Jewish woman on this particular campus is important. And of course, it coexisted with all the other things that we did. And then I was invited to join the building committee for the Center for Jewish Life. So Celia, I told you I had a story about the building that you're sitting in right now. It didn't exist, and they, to their credit, to the leadership's credit at the time on campus, wanted to have a diverse representation. And so rather than just people who were devoted, kosher dining hall attendees, they reached out and they included me as representative of a woman, of someone who was not Orthodox, but was firmly committed in being Jewish. So that was a great experience. That was the first time I was really thrown into collaborating across difference in the Jewish community, because up until then I had gone to a day school where everyone sort of thought within a certain range, right? It was a certain type of community day school. I had gone to a summer camp where everyone was denominationally the same. Same thing with youth groups. And so that was a really tremendous experience to sort of see how negotiating across difference and trying to find both sort of negotiated answers where we just kind of had to live with the answers, and places where actually we celebrated that we found a true commonality. So that was a great experience. I would say in grad school, I had gotten married literally the month before I started grad school. And I did get to know the Hillel a little bit at Stanford's campus, but I was mostly sort of a DIYer. And I will tell you, this is not necessarily flattering to Stanford, but it happens all the time, I think, in a lot of places. There was like an outdoor action kind of, let's all go camping and rafting together to get to know each other at the beginning of our 2 years as business school students. And it happened to be on Yom Kippur. And, coming from the East Coast, in my head, I was like, this has got to be a calendar mistake. And so I, emailed and I said, I'm sure this is a mistake. And they wrote back like, sorry, I don't think it really affects that many students. Well, it turns out, quite a few of the students were actually Jewish in my class, but many of them were okay with making that. They sort of said, okay, I'll put my Judaism on the side for this particular moment, because I'm not going to miss out establishing myself in this, hotshot community. But I put an email out, not knowing anyone, to the entire class and said, if anyone else, I am going to do, wants to sit this out, even though we're sad to miss it. And we look forward to, my husband and I look forward to meeting you when, everyone gets back. In order to celebrate Yom Kippur together, we're going to host something. And we ended up having at least 25 or more people to raise their hand and say, oh, thank you. I was feeling so perplexed. So I would see that was like a little preview of sort of me just jumping in and saying, if something needed done, I'm happy to do it. And it was a way to sort of benefit me as well as benefit my community.
Thank you so much for that answer. I can say the CGL building that you helped with is lovely. I am here right now. Switching gears a little bit. So I know that your business life and mission are balanced by a strong commitment to tzedakah and tikkun olam. How have your Jewish values informed how you approach business and philanthropy? And can you also speak a bit to the Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah? What does Living Torah mean for you and the foundation?
Those were great questions. I love all these questions you guys are asking me. So first, I would say I'm going to go a little bit more specific on these values. So of course, tzedakah, tikkun olam, those are nice big umbrella values. But what you'll see is even in the values I talked about earlier that we published for our company, which are secular values and work for every employee regardless of their faith background, I would say there's probably a lot of commonalities between those and some core concepts or core values that our foundation possesses that really is a reflection of my values and my family's values. And we spent a lot of wonderful time as a family coming up with them. And if anyone wants to go look at them, I'm not going to give you, the entire rundown, but if you want to go to Lippman, Lippman, Kanfer, Kanfer.org. We have our two foundations listed there, and you can click into either one at some later time and look for the About Us where our values are listed. But you'll see a certain sort of digging into our traditions and our texts and saying, what is the wisdom there that is going to guide us in our actions across all the sectors of our life, right? I like to think of this as the values that I parent with, the values that I do business with, the values that I join organizations and volunteer with or support financially. So for the first one is just the sort of essential dignity of humans. And that sort of animates our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion efforts that are both at our foundation and at our company, and just fundamentally informs the cultures that we aspire to create. I'm not saying we're perfect. We are always on a journey of self-improvement. But I would say we really strive to make sure that every single person that we interact with feels seen, heard, given opportunity. So that's an example. And another one, which I really like, it sort of comes from this sort of Elu ve'elu, this sort of idea that there can be multiple words of God and multiple truths. But of course, sometimes you have to pick one way, like Hillel's versus Shemai's, just to kind of move forward, right? You can't get stuck in the no, you're right kind of moment. So I would say in our business, we are very dialogic. We are very much leave your epaulets at the door. Everyone come on in. Let's be really clear on what we're talking about and what the sort of challenges at hand. And whoever has insight, whether it's because you're on the floor and you're the factory floor or the field with the customer and you have that kind of insight, or you're someone who's a big boundary spanning strategic thinker and you're pulling dots in from other industries and that's where you have insight. But we all sort of come together, and then we don't have to be right? It's better to get to a good answer than to win the fight or win the argument. So I would say this idea of sort of really seeing each other as partners and getting to the best answer is sort of informing how we work together. And then I would say just this notion, we call it, like in the foundation side, we call it like Nachshon, right? The character in Midrash of the first Israelite who went into the water before it started to part when the Israelites were escaping Mitzrayim, escaping Egypt. That Nachshon, the one who had to have enough confidence in this audacious vision to sort of take a chance. And at our company, we talk about bold leadership. I mean, to invest 10 years worth of CapEx in the middle of a pandemic, which wasn't going to come online in time, most likely to meet the demand that we were not meeting. I mean, that takes some audacity. That takes a lot of, bold leadership. So I would say So we bring our whole selves and the way that we think, to everything that we do. And I mean, I could, sort of, go on about these values, which are so dear to me. The last things I'll just say is, we really try to be first anchored I talk about being purpose driven as a company at the very top of things. What are we trying to accomplish? What are our values and how we do it? And what's our vision of the world out there? And that gives us alignment. When we're clear on that, lots of different ways to sort of experiment to get there. And we're very experimental, both in business and in our foundation. And we're really anchored on the long haul. As a family enterprise, I don't think about, of course I think about next quarter's earnings, but I really think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where's this enterprise going? So I would just say that's how my Judaism certainly impacts my philanthropy and my business, every single day. And the Jewish people, right? We are a long haul enterprise too. We are a people in formation, and all of us are helping write our own story as a people every day, which actually gets me to your next part of the question. I think you're asking about Living Torah, which is part of our One Foundation's name. So Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah. So it's actually a double entendre. The first meaning for Living Torah is sort of more obvious. It's sort of live Torah, right? So there's a social scientific concept that for change to happen, you have to be working at 3 levels: the affective, the cognitive, and the behavioral. So affective is feeling, how we feel, our attitudes and feelings. Cognitive is how we think. And then behavioral is, of course, how we act. And we are very focused on the act of being Jewish, that it's sort of doing Jewish. I don't mean just going out and doing activities, but sort of internalizing these Jewish values, these Jewish concepts, and then saying, how do I then go behave in the world that would be different if I didn't have them? So how do I go out and apply the Jewish wisdom that is my tradition? So that's the first meaning of living Torah. And then the second one is really about Torah as an adaptive system, as sort of a accumulated and accumulating wellspring of wisdom. So from our traditional sources, right, the Mishnah, the Talmud, etc., as well as the sort of ever accumulating sources, right? So Yehuda Amichai, his poetry, and perhaps, some art installation that, is happening somewhere in Midtown Manhattan or maybe South Manhattan. And now you could get into all kinds of debates, which I'm happy to have, sort of offline. We do it all the time in our foundation, which is like, where do you draw the line? But I think there's sort of, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook said that it's like this tension of renewing the old and sanctifying the new. It's sort of like we want to bring in new wisdom traditions, but we want them to be sanctified. And there's, I'm not saying that our foundation is at all the arbiter of what should be sanctified and what isn't. I think it's sort of this process that we are all going through together, those of us who say we want to engage in Jewish wisdom. So what our foundation is really trying to do is make being Jewish not sort of a continuity exercise or anything other than saying the Jewish wisdom tradition should be a source of living a better life and living a more meaningful life, and then making the world better. So this is not just for Jews, right? This is about the human dignity seeking that I was talking about earlier, and going out and pursuing a more perfect world, which is really sort of my definition of Moshiach.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that was definitely some great insight into the philanthropy aspect. So just kind of as a follow-up question there, sorry, I'm having a little message come up. So is there any way that you could elaborate just a little bit more on why Jewish philanthropy is specifically important to you, and kind of what it means to kind of be so involved in these initiatives?
Well, I don't view Jewish philanthropy just as serving the Jewish community. So I will tell you, this guy right here on my right shoulder, that's Jerry Lippman. I called him Grandpa, but he's really my great uncle. He's one of our co-founders with my great aunt Goldie. He lived a lot longer than Goldie did, unfortunately. Fortunately for him, not for her. And he sort of he was the founder of our business, and helped raise me too as a grandfather figure. And he used to be very concerned with the well-being of our local Akron, Ohio community, and want to make sure that he helped women who were in, distressing situations at home, or people who were hungry. But he always wanted to do that help through the Jewish community. He didn't care about himself getting his name on the wall, or anyone saying that Jerry Littman, gave to this shelter or gave to that food bank. What he wanted is a Jewish community to get the credit and to be self-improved by it. And so I just learned from a young age, and our foundation actually internalized that strategy, which is, yes, of course, there's sort of the indirect impact that I talked about in my last answer of let's make the Jewish people, better. But then there's the direct, and then that will have an indirect positive impact on the world. But then there's sort of the direct impact through the Jewish world. So I will tell you, for instance, I gave 10 good years of my life to really significant involvement on the AJWS board, American Jewish World Service. And that's an organization which does tremendous work in the developing world, pursuing human rights and supporting sort of the grassrooted efforts by people on the ground in these countries around the world to secure human rights. And I love that it's in the Jewish name. It is Jewish work, I think, in the essence of the values, but it's clearly objectively human rights work. So there's a ton of funders who really want to do good human rights work that support AJWS, not because they care about the Jewish community getting credit, but because they think they're really tremendous. And I'll give you another example. During the last election cycle, our family and our family foundation have been very concerned about the state of democracy. And this, we really believe, should not be a partisan issue. It should be a nonpartisan issue, or at very least a transpartisan issue. Unfortunately, it's become partisanized, which I won't go into my whole discourse on that. But we come from a place, we do have political leanings, but putting those aside, because that's a separate effort that we make political donations. But in terms of our defense of democracy, we really have invested a fair amount of energy and resources into helping secure, nonviolence and free and fair elections, so that everyone has the right to vote and so forth. And we actually did this free and fair campaign through our foundation, which was to really support American Jews supporting American democracy and the rule of law and so forth. And to me, is that Jewish philanthropy, or is that not Jewish philanthropy? So I guess, I really love doing philanthropy, not exclusively within the Jewish world, but I love to do it. I mean, for me, it sort of gives me a lot of, it fills up my own personal well, and it gives me a greater understanding of Jewish wisdom, and it allows me to practice applying it in a Jewish context and with Jewish colleagues. And I also feel like it makes the Jewish community better when we do that. And I like to be provocative and sort of push the Jewish community in ways to keep being our best selves. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, look, I don't think that Judaism is the best or only wisdom tradition out there, but it's mine, it's ours, and I really believe that it has so much goodness in it that we should exploit and leverage. I just saw Tim. Hi, Tim. I just saw him talk about Meets Vote. Yeah, we're big supporters of Meets Vote. And Aaron Dorfman, a colleague of mine, we talk often. I just talked to him today, actually, and we were talking about some successes you're having in specific campuses and being excited about how to expand those to other campuses. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example of how, I guess you could call it Jewish philanthropy, because we're giving money to Hillel. But really, this is about, to me, it's like a win-win, right? We're getting bang for our buck. We're supporting the Jewish world, and at the same time, we're supporting a better world for all. So I think that's why I like it. And I will say it's not okay to say that's the only way to do things. I will tell you my dramatic, disproportionate effort outside of work and family is within the Jewish community, but often I would say, or exclusively for the benefit of a broader community.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such a great point that Judaism and philanthropy can overlap in many ways. I think switching gears a bit for probably our last question, because of climate change, ESG and environmental impact have become really important areas for businesses to focus on. and philanthropy. So as a strategic business leader, how do you think about and mitigate environmental impact?
Great. So we'll switch that back to the business realm. For sure, since 2007, I have been championing sustainability leadership within our company. And I really believe that that was on the shoulders of and in the spirit of what Goldie and Jerry, our co-founders back in the 40s, would have wanted and sort of created even back then. They would have never called it sustainability leadership, but they were very frugal, they were very prudent, they were very resource minded. And I would say that sort of gave us sort of a running start. But in 2007, we really decided to take our commitment to a new level. And we went through a massive sort of multi-stakeholder conversation around how to do sustainability. And in our case, it was social, environmental, and economics, or how to have that virtuous sort of triple bottom line. And because we're in the sort of health fields, we really wanted to include that social element. Ironically, because I talked about H1N1 outbreak in 2009, literally, I think it was 11 days after we finished this multi-hundred person stakeholder gathering around the topic of sustainability leadership, H1N1 hit us, and so we had to stop everything for the next year just to respond to that pandemic. But fortunately, all of the work that we had done was not lost. And my biggest insight that we sort of took from that period going forward is that sustainability has to be a driver of innovation. It cannot be seen as either a check the box kind of exercise or an annoying constraint that won't let me go do the real innovation that I want to do. I mean, truly, innovation is helped by constructive constraints, right? That's where creativity comes from. If you could do anything without any limit, it's really hard to come up with that solution that's just going to make the difference. But when you have constructive constraints, that's really what creates sort of the sparks of progress and the sparks of creativity. And so I have been hammering into my colleagues for years. They would say, oh yeah, Marcella's going to say sustainability is a driver of innovation and value creation too. And so we really talk about how we're going to create value, how we're going to make markets. That's a term that we use at GOJO all the time. We're going to make a market, which means we're going to create new opportunities. Some people call it blue ocean versus red ocean, where everyone's sort of fighting themselves, but like, hey, let's go swim in the wide open waters where something new can happen. And, over the years, different things have been important to us. I would say the first 5 years from, sort of 10 to 15 were much more about table stakes, like just sort of understanding how do we, track and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, our water usage, et cetera. Really important stuff. And we didn't know how to set goals, but we set and vastly exceeded our goals by doing some really creative things. And again, because we were forced to, we got really creative. And now we're at a place, sort of this is our third cycle on goal setting, where we're really embracing the most material things that we can do. One of them is around sustainable chemistry. And that is really hard to do with regulation. The FDA regulates our categories, and there are a lot of things that we'd like to do, but we just can't do within sort of the monograph that guides us. But we're working, with the regulatory bodies, and we are also using that as a constructive constraint. And so from my perspective, the kinds of products that you put on skin and the reduction and elimination of any chemistries that can be problematic, both for the ecosystem out in the world as well as for humans, that's a must do. That's the Purell promise. I would never put a Purell product on myself or on a surface that I'm going to touch or eat off of that did not have the highest integrity and the highest safety profile. So that just goes with our brand and goes with our values as a company. And another one is, right now, I'm sure a lot of people are worried about the plastics problem. We are very worried about it too. And, single-use plastic is a problem that's here to stay until we humans solve our way out of that. And we are embracing that challenge and saying, how might we? And we have hundreds of products that are already cradle to cradle design certified, but we're not resting on our laurels. We recognize that a core format of getting Purell is the plastic bottle. So we're working hard on that. Of course, there's just sort of sustainable operations in addition to innovation. So before the pandemic, a couple years before, we had turned the sort of power switch on a huge solar field at our largest distribution center, and the field powered all of our distribution, which was really exciting. Unfortunately, with our growth, we haven't yet at this point expanded our sustainable power generating capacity. So we're no longer offsetting all of our distribution energy usage, but we're going back to the drawing board to figure out how we can do this. And I would say, this is not just about sort of reducing the negative. I'm part of, a little shout out to the sort of Cleveland Hillel community. I'm part of the Case Western Reserve University's business school, Weatherhead's school program called the Fowler Center. It's a lot of names, folks, but the Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And the whole premise of the Fowler Center is that business, not just the nonprofit sector or the business sector, has to drive the solution towards the world's most intransigent, challenging problems. So, I have taken that ethos really, really seriously. So I'm on their advisory board, and I've been influenced heavily by how they think and orient. And so I would say it is every business person's obligation. I think there's tremendous market opportunity and market leadership opportunity, but also I think just, if we want to be here in 30 years as businesses, we got to start preparing now for these discontinuities. And, for instance, right now we're really talking about sustainable supply chain. I mean, everyone around us right now is affected. You can't get the products you want when you want them. You can't get a new car because all the chips aren't available. I mean, there's a global supply chain phenomenon, and some of that disruption is not just COVID. Some of it is, the world's climate crisis, where there's rising tides and floods and storms and so forth. And so I would say, as a business person, it's both a moral obligation as well as a pragmatic obligation to set up the company to sort of take on these challenges. And the last thing I'll say is, I know this isn't necessarily environmental, but I mentioned the social earlier, and I just think our obligation also is to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, because that's another crisis, is making sure that all humans really have a chance at an opportunity to better themselves and live a great life.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap up now, but that was a fantastic place to leave it. Marcella, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a privilege to have you on here at Hillel at Home and be able to speak with you along with Eli. Thank you everyone who joined. We really appreciate you attending, and probably those of you who are watching this later. I would also like to thank Princeton, of course, and Stanford and Cleveland Hillels for partnering to welcome Marcella to this program. And finally, just a quick Hillel plug. There are lots of great events happening. As always, check with your own campuses as well as hillelathome.org. So again, thank you all so much for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.